So I don't know. You got out of someone's yard or?
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking time to join us for the Measure A Committee meeting this afternoon on Monday, January 12th. It's 3 p.m. and we'd like to get started if possible. Looking at the agenda, let's just go right to it unless there's any comments that we have to say beforehand. No. Okay, hearing none. First step we want to do is we want to approve last month's meeting of December the 4th.
So yeah, these draft meeting minutes were placed in your packet.
Yeah.
And unless there are any errors, we would request that they be approved by the committee. I will note, and if I failed to do so at your last meeting, that we take what we call action minutes. They're very brief minutes because the meetings are recorded and posted on the district's website through a YouTube link. So if there's ever like more details or whatever, the person who wants to review the minutes can just actually go and observe the whole meeting if they'd like.
Okay.
I move to approve the minutes from December 4th meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Meetings minutes from the December 4th meeting have been approved.
Sleep.
Okay. So our next step is really the big piece in our puzzle. And I thank you, Natalie, in advance for your time putting this together, and certainly yourself, Jeff, well, and Harry, kind of making sure everything's ready to go with this here. It's really the part of the job as a committee member that matters most. As the bylaws state, we have to have an oversight committee to make sure that the funds that are gathered from property taxes are used as they should be used. And this is a chance for us to look it over. And I don't know how much they changed from last December, but nevertheless, to kind of see what it looks like, ask questions, and feel free to understand elements of it, because that's where I found myself really gaining information just about how this whole thing is laid out. So anyway, so on that note, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure, sure. We sent this out to you in December when we first received them, and I can confirm that the board of directors did accept the audit statements or the audit report at their December meeting, and we included it in your packet today. There's a lot of information here that's beyond maybe what you were looking for, but our auditors produced a report that looks very similar to the prior 2 years. That's because we've been using this audit firm. This is the third time they've prepared statements, so the format is identical to the last couple of years. There's just a few things I think that are worth highlighting here for you, and I probably should have got to those more quickly. One, we got a clean opinion, which means the district's books were maintained in a way that complies with GASB, and there were no material weaknesses, and so the auditors were able to provide what's known as a clean opinion. They do note, of course, that not every transaction is examined. They sample transactions, etc. So that's important. And then I'll want to just kind of again jump. We're happy to talk to you about this in as much detail as you'd like. There's a sort of some financial highlights. I mean, all of this you can review however you'd like, but the real primary nuts and bolts of the Measure A Oversight Committee is to review the expenditures and revenues associated with Measure A. And for that, I would take you down to the government funds portion and of the financial statements. So I should have.
It's page 19 or page 16 on the financial statements.
Yeah.
Thank you. So here is the fire protection, is the fire fund essentially here. The Measure A parcel tax under revenue shows that we received just shy of $527,000. Let me blow this up a little more. $526,123. All of the Measure A proceeds, this is, I think, important for you. Measure A proceeds are broken out as a separate line item, and all of the proceeds are placed within the fire fund. You'll find no other Measure A money in any other fund of the district. That's critical. The funds of the Measure A was exclusively for fire services, cannot be used in any other way. And then you can see here that the total expenditures for the fire fund were about a little over $3.1 million for last fiscal year. You know, of that, about a little over $1 million is capital outlay. We purchased or made the payment on a fire engine that's not yet here. About $1.4 million in salary and benefits, about $300,000 in materials and services, and about $320,000 in admin cost allocation. So really, sort of the nuts and bolts of it is contained, you know, right here in terms of the auditors have listed where the revenues were received and all placed within the fire fund, and these are the expenditures that were incurred during that prior fiscal year. Again, this is July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So the year ending about 6 months ago.
So all the fire fund monies, they're all commingled, they're not broken down to, you know, the Measure A was used exclusively for this, or they just put them all.
Yeah, I mean, they're not commingled with other funds of the district, but they're placed within the fire fund. Now, our fire fund, we break down on our general ledger we have line item expenses that are more detailed than what this shows. In other words, you see salary and benefits there of 1.393 million. In our general ledger, we maintain, you know, full-time or salaries, reserve firefighter wages, there'll be like a dozen benefit line items.
Oh, yeah.
For that. And then again, Measure A is specifically broken out because we've ensured that the auditor continues to separately list that, but other items are kind of commingled because we maintain more line items than are here.
Okay.
The other thing that I would tell you is we maintain you could call it sub funds or some other funds that are affiliated with the fire fund. For example, we maintain a capital account that is made up of primarily development impact fee funds and interest that earns. So that's maintained separately from the fire fund. We maintain an asset replacement account. It's a subset of the fire fund, and it's maintained separately, but as a part of the overall fire fund operation. We maintain a fund that we call future operations. And again, I think I explained this at your last meeting that we knew when Measure A was implemented that costs would go up faster than the revenues, and so monies that were saved in the initial years would be set aside to be spent in the out years. And so that was a way of reflecting that savings. So we have those sub funds, but they're not necessarily independent. They're commingled in these balances. For example, or this statement. For example, this $1,097,000. About $1 million of that was the payment for the prepayment for the fire engine, and that came out of the capital fund. We expect to receive 75% of that back from a grant, but we can't receive the grant money until the engine's actually here.
Delivery, okay.
Yes. So that fund will be reimbursed most of its expenses when the engine arrives, or once we're able to process the reimbursement. It's a federal grant. So this capital outlay didn't come out of the operating fund, so to speak.
You know, Bill, one of the questions I had at the very beginning when I first joined here was just the same that you had.
Oh,
You know, is this going to be labeled bought by Measure A funds? You know, so a fire chief or a fire captain has something that says, like, oh, Measure A. The answer was no. It's not a good way of using funds, and I agree with that. So that's why it's really important when we look at the overall expenditures that are made in the fire and fire and emergency services budget, that everything fits within what was delegated as being reasonable for Measure A. And that's why, and it took me a few meetings to kind of wrap my head around, well, wait a minute, how does that work? But since everything we're spending in the fire department for the fire emergency services falls within the scope,
Measure A
yeah, the
scope,
scope, yeah,
okay.
then it doesn't necessarily have to be
Yeah,
divvied out separately.
okay.
Yeah, so basically, one way to look at it is prior to the implementation of Measure A, we only had 2 full-time employees working in Templeton Fire, and we were able to add additional staffing. Once Measure A was approved, we brought in a full-time fire chief. Previously, that was prior to Measure A's implementation, that was a part-time position. And we brought on another captain and another full-time engineer, all because of Measure A, the Measure A funds became available. But now we've been incurring those expenses for, a little over 5 years since Measure A, since the money first came into the district. So it's a little harder to compare pre-Measure A to post-Measure A.
Okay.
It's been going on for a bit now. These balances that you see on the same page are not the balances of just the operating funds. They're all of those funds that I just described in terms of the capital fund, the operating fund, the asset replacement fund, the future operating fund. That's what's listed when you see these fund balances. So some of that money, for example, those capital funds are restricted. The district cannot spend it on salaries and benefits. They have to be spent on one-time purchases that expand our services. But yeah, so in a nutshell, this is what was produced in the past. I can tell you this committee has kind of again, as I think the chair has mentioned, they've compared the Measure A income, which for the year that we're looking at was again just shy of $527,000, and you don't have to really get any further than just salaries and benefits to see how it's used. If it was used only for salaries and benefits, it would cover just over 1/3 of our salary and benefit expenses within the fire fund.
Okay.
Has that percentage changed at all over the years?
Well, our expenses have grown faster than our revenue has over the years. In the first several years, we had the aggregate produced a little bit of a savings, in other words, a surplus each year. And so that's how we kind of built up that savings account. And now we're in a place, it's a little, we can look at this because and you can kind of see this past year, we spent down the total fund balances are about $500,000 less than they were to start the year, but about $1 million of that was that one capital expenditure. So we're in a spot like the current year started out at a small deficit that was expected. Things will change over the course of the year. We participated in some out-of-county assignments. We'll bring in some net revenue to the district. We'll also likely incur some expenses that were not anticipated outside of that. And so the forecast we have a fire and emergency management committee that has reviewed a number of scenarios, like looking into 26, 27, and the expectation is we'll be at a deficit for next fiscal year. Somewhere in the neighborhood of, it kind of depends on some details, but maybe initially, $50,000 to $70,000. That's a rough estimate. So we've reached that point where expenditures are now higher than overall revenues.
As anticipated.
As was anticipated, but that plan can't go on indefinitely, right? And we have a little bit of a savings account we can spend down, but it's like any of you, if you're spending more than you're bringing in, you reach a point where that's something has to give.
Yeah. Questions, comments, thoughts?
of my head, but I'm beginning to understand it more and more, yes.
The fire department, the TCSD itself, receives a grant that has allowed us also to purchase personnel.
Safer, we call it safer, yeah.
I know that sits outside our scope, it's more in the Fire and Emergency Services Committee, but it really sits, it's a part of delivering the services. Can you update us on?
Sure, yes, we've received, over in time, more than one safer grant, but the most recent one was awarded in, the late summer of 2022. It was a grant that we had applied for earlier that year. And we had applied for it previously as well, but hadn't received an award for several years. And it provides for the hiring of 2 full-time fire engineers that began in February of 2023 for a 3-year period. And that grant will lapse in in about a month, about 5 weeks, actually. The funding for those engineer positions will lapse. We applied again last summer to continue that program. The grant had changed a little bit, but we nonetheless applied to fund the full-time engineer positions, but we were not awarded a continuance of that safer grant. So actually, at the board's next meeting, just next Tuesday, tomorrow, they'll be evaluating some options that relates to those full-time engineer positions. Whether to revert to our sort of pre-safer model, which we kind of call the Measure A staffing model, or something else. Continue with what we're doing now, not likely because it would cost us about another $250,000 a year, and we really rapidly spent through our savings, or maintaining the positions and eliminating other programs to pay for them. We have a reserve firefighter program that allows us to bring on more resources to serve on out of county assignments. And right now, actually since Measure A first began, we've essentially had reserve firefighters on duty all the time. And if we eliminate that program, that can partially offset the cost of those full-time engineers, and that's an option we'll be considering as well.
It sounds though that whatever option is selected, we're still gonna be able to maintain the 24/7 coverage that we
Yes.
aiming for with Measure A.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, yes, none of the alternatives eliminate 24/7 coverage. It's just a matter of how you achieve that coverage and how many persons are on duty at any time.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I was curious about.
Those grants, do they come from the state or is that federal?
That was a safer grants, federal grant administered through FEMA.
Okay.
And we'll continue to examine, the program hasn't gone away. We'll continue to examine alternatives. And again, safer grant's been around a long time, and we had received a safer grant, maybe 14 or 15 years ago now. That lasted 3 years, and then, continued to apply for them for several years. Applied, not received, and then we again the fiscal year or the calendar year 2022 application was awarded, began in 23, lapses this year, actually, fairly soon.
So when you applied for the safer grant, it was specifically for the extra engineers, or captains.
It was specifically for the extra engineers, yes.
So they, the federal government sets the rules as far as what you can use the money for, or?
Yeah, it's related to staffing. There are several models you can choose from, but in terms of like what the staffing is what the intended purpose is. But in this case, our application from last year was, or late last, I think it was in July when it was applied, was to maintain, to keep the engineer positions filled and describe the benefits of doing so.
Well, that's not the best choice, using the funds, but it's good to know that the quality, the level of coverage will be maintained.
Well, again, yeah, none of the alternatives under consideration would eliminate the 24/7. That would be, essentially a direct violation of Measure A, which said the purpose of Measure A was to obtain 24/7 staffing. So there's no alternatives under consideration that would have us go dark so to speak. But how that's achieved will likely be different than it has been for the past nearly 3 years.
And will that likely change once it's a decision made? How soon could that change again with another safer option?
Oh, so as far as I know, the safer grants have been available annually. But again, I'd caution or temper expectations that we're gonna be able to get another one. Some agencies have been able to get them in successive periods, but many do not. And the safer program was, like, when we have applied for it, the prior two that we had received, the most recent two anyway, covered essentially 100% of the salary or of the salary and benefit costs. So it was really an attractive program to get into. They were quite competitive starting last year, and we don't know what next year's safer grant will look like necessarily. There was a matching component that changed over the period of the years. I believe the first 2 years were 25% match, and the third year was something like a 66% match. I could be wrong about that by a little bit, but so it was less attractive. We still went for it, and but we're not awarded it. But it's possible that over time, if it's less attractive, well, it'll actually improve our odds of obtaining if there are fewer applicants. But that's where in the short term, we don't have another safer funding coming forward, at the conclusion of this period, this safer grant period.
Thank you. That was what it was.
So, yeah, if that's something you're interested in, again, I expect that will be on our January 20th board meeting agenda. So just as soon as next Tuesday, and that might be something you want to. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions about the budget side at all?
No, we do.
Do you have any you want to share or feedback?
I'm good.
Your chance to spend some money.
Don't give me that option.
I have always had the perspective in my role here of not only looking at how the money was spent to make sure that it was spent as it was designated, but to make sure the impact of those monies were what the spirit of the amendment was about. And those impacts are three. One is to provide essential local fire protection and emergency medical services 24/7. And then the second is to reduce fire and 9/11 emergency response times. And then the third is to train and retain qualified fighters. So yes, we spend the money the way we're supposed to, but is it really making a difference, so to speak? And it has consistently been achieved. I'm just curious to know, this isn't, actually, the fire happened after July 1st, so that's a different story. But overall, how has that looked as far as the impact of Measure A? Has there been, we're maintaining 24/7. Emergency response times, I noticed I looked at the March 2025 fire report that was shared with me. Thank you, Carrie. It gave some times that looked good. It seems like most of the services are medical emergencies rather than fire and structural kind of stuff, like significantly. But how has that gone as far as the continuing to monitor response times and continuing to be able to train and retain qualified firefighters?
Well, so it's, again, it becomes a little, as time goes by, it's harder and harder to compare to what we were doing back in, say, 2019 and 4. But the response times have been steady since Measure A was implemented. We haven't, they haven't become necessarily diminished or worsened since then, and they are certainly better. We back prior to the implementation of Measure A or the 24/7 staffing, again, back in the let's say the decade of the 2010s, while we had some firefighters on duty during the day, it had varied over the course of the decade, but for the most part, we had personnel on duty during the day. And so we were able to initiate a rapid response from the station during the day. At night, we were dependent on either those reserve firefighters or even our full-time staff members responding from home to the station to the call. And so there was a big difference in response times from the periods of time we were staffed and when we were not. Now, there are more calls that occur during the day, and so it's not like it's necessarily evenly split in terms of calls that occurred at night versus during the day. But those nighttime responses were notably slower back prior to the 24/7 staffing. So once we've implemented 24/7 staffing, as that report had shown, it's been consistently improved. We don't yet have a 2025 annual report prepared, but expect that will come in the next month or two. I do know that our call volume has steadily increased, and I believe I was told a number of like 1280. 1229 calls during 2025. So it's even higher. That we had a kind of a record-setting year the prior. Well, I guess for the past 2 years, we've had 3 years in a row. We've set a new high number of calls. So the call volume has steadily increased, even though our population really hasn't grown much for many years here.
And I think that's also an important piece. This is occurring at a time when a 10 to 15% increase in call volume, annual increase has been occurring. So maintaining that quality level of service, despite, you know, the increased amount of.
Yeah, and in the short term, we are employing essentially all of our fire captains have been in their role now for several years, and while we did lose one full-time engineer during 2025, and then replaced them with somebody who we were already affiliated with, the staffing's been consistent. The safer positions, when we added those 2 full-time engineers, you know, we expected there to be some turnover in those roles because the position was not guaranteed beyond the 3 years. And that's kind of what has happened is we added 2 full-time folks, and we've gone through a couple of a little turnover in those positions in that 3-year period because they've found roles that were more secure elsewhere, not knowing if this role would be available after February of this year. So I wouldn't, you know, I don't attribute that turnover to a lack of success of Measure A, but rather just the fact that the Safer Grant fund money was limited. It had a short duration, you know, 3-year term.
The right amount. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for responding to that. That's kind of go back.
Yeah, and again, we kind of monitor from a fiscal perspective, we're looking at fiscal year 2024, 25, and then we kind of monitor calls and other information like kind of a calendar year, so they don't necessarily line up. But if you look at it for, like, you know, over a long period of time, it's pretty steady in terms of all growth.
And in fact, in that last report from last March, there are multiple years of data showing that these call responses and the types of calls that mostly arise. Okay. So on that note, we've reviewed the audited file. Is there any action required at this point?
No, not for that item, other than it is in the bylaws that you would be reviewing that and utilizing this information as a key component to developing the committee's report to the board and public about whether or not the funds were used properly. In other words, it was expected that the annual audit would be an important component of your or of your oversight, a tool that you would use in developing oversight. And again, I do want to just note the audit is conducted independently. The district board hires an independent CPA firm. Those are not people who work with us regularly. They come, they perform this work independently and deliver this independent report.
Among the board members here, are there any questions about that audit or any concerns or any thoughts that you might have that question how these funds are being used? You know, not looking at making decisions about how it was spent, as long as it was spent within the framework that the measurement says.
And according to what I've heard, yeah, it's been properly used.
Now, when you do get those funds from the county, is it, because you know, property taxes are twice a year, is it like one lump sum or is it?
So we get property tax, so Measure A happens to be collected alongside property taxes. It's not a component of, it shows up on your tax bill and you pay it with your property taxes, all property owners are, but it isn't, it's a separate parcel tax. When you look at your property tax bill, you should see a Measure A, I think it's labeled Measure A 19, Templeton Fire, on the property tax bill. We get most of those funds in like December and April, but actually some people,
Every month.
but some people, you'd be surprised, every time there's like a transaction, when someone sells a home, the taxes have to be paid up, and so we get, and some people prepay or they pay all their money early or whatever, so we get it as it's received. It's not just exclusively twice a year,
Okay,
but the majority of it would be when you would think.
okay, Natalie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're saying you get like monthly checks and whatever. Okay, so it's based on,
But the bulk comes in like in two or 3 months over the year, yeah.
And some people get their bill and they pay the whole thing. They get it in October, they write the check, it's done, and then we would get it all. In that case, we get it as the county receives it essentially. But not immediately.
no, they gotta take their part.
Yeah, they take their time and then they take a little haircut.
Is there a sunset date for?
Measure A does not have a sunset.
Okay.
I will note, though, since it's not an issue of sunset necessarily, but Measure A has an index. It goes up by the CPI, but is limited to 2%. That's not a Prop 13 matter. You know, that is the case with property taxes in general. They can't go up any faster than 2%. That was a cap that our board of directors put on, the thinking being that that was something that some voters might find as a necessary safety net or a limit. But in our case, and like property taxes in general, because it only goes up by that 2%, we begin trailing actual cost increases, right? You know, we went through that really high inflationary period. Maybe we're still kind of in it, you know, in the sort of post-COVID times. And so had that not been there, had the cap had not been set 2%, the amount we collect annually would be higher than it is now. And so you mentioned, is there a sunset date? There is not. It will go on until voters change it. But it may mean that the district or somebody seeks to alter this sooner than they might have otherwise, because again, just simply that cap, or there are other expenses that are envisioned that may require voters to consider another measure. Voters could also, the district could, or even a group of citizens could put forward a ballot measure that would terminate this program, even outside the district initiating such. You know, and you mentioned, you know, what's changed or you know, how are things going? I mean, I'm quite confident had Measure A not been approved by voters back in 2019, we wouldn't have a fire. We might have fire service for our community. I think we would, but it wouldn't probably be through Templeton Community Service District by now.
With the county, probably.
Yeah, we would not have been able to sustain our you know, what had worked in the 70s and 80s and 90s was no longer working very well. And then even since then, our call volume has gone up quite a bit. We'd just be facing even more challenges than we had been back again 8 or 10 years ago.
With that cap, I'm just wondering, so if CPI goes up 3% and we get 2%, the following year if CPI goes up 1%, do we just get the 1% or do we
I
get?
believe that's how it's written. Yeah.
So we can't get that from the previous
Right.
years? Oh. Okay.
It's very possible that some further initiative could come together to request funds to fully.
Yeah, not necessarily only because of that cap, but I think it is a factor that over time becomes more significant, right? Like, you know, losing 1%, you know, it's, but you know, if you're 10 or 15 years down the road and you've lost 2% a year, you're all of a sudden 30%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. which, once again, really kind of underscores our review, because if TCSD board of directors wants to go out to the community to seek an additional source of funding, they'll have our homework to rely on to show, yes, we've been acting in good faith, or this is what we have, good things, so.
Yeah, and again, this was part of this independent oversight was part of the ballot measure, again, is another, to ensure the public that these were transparently used, and there was somebody independently reviewing this. You're not, I think we reviewed the bylaws, like a member of the board cannot serve on this oversight committee, or an employee cannot serve on the oversight committee. It's intended to be as independent as possible.
Okay, any comments, any more follow-up on a review of the audited financials from anybody?
No.
Okay, let's move forward then.
All right.
Once again, appreciation is noted to the members of the team creating this.
Thank you. Primarily, Natalie deals with our audit team, and she's always grateful when it's over.
Okay, sometime on the board is the preparation of a report to the board. Jeff, you want to just kind of
Sure,
outline that process?
Sure. So again, this is probably the fifth or sixth year the committee has reached this point in time. And each of those prior years, the committee has considered the information that district staff has presented, as well as the independent audit or the audited financial statements. And then the committee has developed an independent report to the board. And for most of those prior reports, your current chair has led that effort. And I believe we discussed at your last meeting that the chairperson's term on this committee is going to lapse pretty soon. And one of the ways that this has occurred in years past, and I think effectively, but does not need to occur this way. It's up to the committee. Is the committee members have essentially designated or delegated the final preparation of the report and presentation of that report to the board to the chairperson of the committee. And again, for many of those prior years, that has been Dan Mosevich, who has prepared a report. He's provided staff a draft before it was finalized for any comments, to be catch a typo or something like that. He's met with the fire chief on I think most years, and then provided a report that I have put a cover staff report to, like just a cover memo describing the work of the committee to the board of directors. And then I would have given the other committee members a draft copy of that report and asked that, look, this report is, I believe, ready to proceed to the board. But if you think that the committee needs to work on it further, then please speak up, and we'll schedule another committee meeting to allow that to occur. If not, this will make its way to the board of directors, and the chairperson or the person who's presenting it, doesn't have to be the chair, but it has been, has attended that meeting. A couple of years we were doing this via Zoom only because we were in sort of COVID protocols. Attended the meeting either in person or via Zoom, and made a few comments about the report and answered any questions the board has had. It's been then the board of directors has accepted the report each of those years, and then we maintain those reports under the transparency page on the district website each year. So that's the process that's essentially been followed. The report is then a kind of a couple of page letter that outlines what the committee has done, and then just some findings and just some other information about the prior, say, year or the period under study in terms of what has occurred within the fire operations. And so I believe at your last meeting, your chairperson had suggested that pattern, if you select if he's going to serve as chair, that pattern can work again this year, and he thought might be able to be done within the next couple of days, and we can make our January 20th board meeting agenda, get it presented. But that doesn't mean, and I guess I want to make sure the other board members or other committee members realize that when you get a copy of this, if you think that it doesn't if that's the way you go about it, let's just say you delegate that role to the chairperson. And when you get a draft copy of this, if you think it doesn't meet your expectations, then please, you have, I think, a duty to tell me, no, there's something wrong, and we're gonna then I'll pull it off that agenda and we'll schedule another Measure A committee meeting. Because you really cannot talk amongst yourselves outside of these committee meetings. So if you see a problem with it, if you see a typo, I'll fix it, that's not a big deal. But if there's something really wrong, like this doesn't represent what you think occurred or whatever, then you need to have another committee meeting before it's finalized or presented to the board. And each year that's occurred, but the committee has, again, the makeup of the committee has changed a few times here, but has found that the draft report was accurately prepared.
So the draft cannot be shared out with the committee members directly, it has to go through.
Yeah, you guys can't, again, in this committee so small, you can't even have a subcommittee work on this because it would be the committee. But so I would envision if this is the way you go, if the committee delegates this role to the chair, that I'll get a draft that I'll look at and we'll make sure it doesn't, that there's any real issues with, and then I'll send that draft we'll send it to all of you and say, please look at this right away, because we're on a tight time frame here. And if you don't have an issue, then we'll put it on the agenda, the board of directors meeting agenda, and either the chair or all of you can come, or one of whoever wishes to come to that meeting. But again, if there's something in that report that doesn't align with your views of what you've reviewed, we would ask you to speak up, and we would we would make sure that didn't move forward, and we would schedule another committee meeting, so that you could continue to work on it, or you could address those issues with the other committee members, because you don't really have an ability to work outside of the committee meetings.
Now, I'm assuming that the report will basically be similar to last year's report, just with as far as some numbers.
Yeah,
Changes.
the format will be pretty
The
consistent.
same, okay.
Yeah, trying to meet the pieces that I understood, at least when I first drafted it, that Jeff and the board would want to look at here.
But like the statement, those paragraphs in it, that you pretty much include them again.
With some adjustment, some
Okay.
updating, but mostly similar to that.
Okay.
But once again, only if it fits for your perspective as well.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to make sure, again, if we go down that road, if you have I'll get you a copy of it before it's made final.
Yeah.
And if you have an issue, that you'd be willing to speak up so that the committee could reconvene before it was final.
Because then, just based on, last year's, reported, I would think, just something, similar to that, with I guess.
Yeah, last
I
year's
didn't see any
report
problem.
wasn't prepared by the current chair, but they followed the same format a similar format to what was prepared in years past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
We had a different chairperson last year.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, I think Dan, you should go ahead and put that together, so you can get it back to Jeff right away, so we can get it back to us. To see whether or not it's gonna be in timeline for the 20th meeting for the TSD.
Yeah.
TSD, yeah.
Only gives us a week to.
Yeah,
Yeah, really less than that, because our agenda packet will try to finalize it by Thursday, Friday at the latest. And so we really, yeah, we'd ask that in order to make this deadline, and again, I don't want to it's our problem if we don't. I mean, it's the district's issue, and we'll figure it out. But since you appointed Dan Mosich to be the chair, and his term is going to lapse actually quite soon, it makes the most sense to try to do this and still have it presented to the board while he's still the chair of the committee.
Okay.
if you guys are good with that, I'm fine with it too.
I'm fine with
Yeah,
it.
let's go with that.
Okay.
You were here this last year, so whatever information you got in there versus the last report, you would have more knowledge than what I would.
Well, yeah,
So,
yeah,
Yeah, and I can have something to you by tomorrow.
Thank you. That's most appreciated. The minute I get it and can, and again, I'm just gonna look at it not from a perspective of, just as another set of eyes on it,
Yes,
you know. But it's the minute where you have that draft form, we'll kick it back out to the committee members and ask you to get back to us by, let's say, Thursday morning or something. And then we would make sure it gets on the board meeting.
If we get Tuesday, yeah, we get it.
But I agree with what you're saying. If there's any, anything there you're looking at, kind of, wait a minute, this is quite how I see that or something.
Then we have to go to Jeff and then we have to.
Yeah, then the solution to that is to schedule a committee meeting, so then you guys can discuss it amongst yourselves.
I can't call you, George, Lindsay.
Unfortunately, you can't, because that would be a quorum of the committee.
Okay.
Because there's only 3 of you, and if 2 of you speak, that's a quorum, and that can only happen at a committee meeting. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's one of the little problems of this really small committee.
Fortunately, it has worked because the process has been accurately followed, and that's
Well,
really
yeah.
makes this work. We're not questioning. We haven't in the past questioned some of the pieces, so that has allowed us to move forward in this with a small group like this. Okay, let's move forward then on
Well,
that.
thank you.
And it's my goal to have that to you by tomorrow, Jeff.
Thank you, thank you.
Fourth point here, I'm kind of confused. So we look at the audit to financials on number 2, the number
Yes.
4 is the line item.
Yeah, because this is for the current fiscal year
Got it,
budget,
got it.
as opposed to the year under audit was 24-25. So this is, again, just for information, not for this report, but for the current fiscal year. So July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. This is what you're gonna look at here is the originally adopted budget from June of last year. June of 2025, beginning again July 1st. I'll be the first to admit that we expect there to be some amendments to this budget before the year is over for a number of reasons. But this is this budget line, this far right column, it says budget 25-26 is the adopted figures. And I just wanted to, so again, this is really in preparation for the committee members that come back and serve in the fall. You'll be looking at end of year financial statements, not audited, but the reports off our general ledger. And they're gonna start with this budget figure.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the building blocks, I guess, that, you know, before the fiscal year actually began. So this shows that, you know, we had expected to receive about $152,000 worth of SAFER funds. That's for those 2 engineer positions from July 1st through mid-February, and then the SAFER grant lapses. We had some we have some interest income associated with interest earnings on the account. I'll just kind of try to highlight, I guess, some of the bigger line items. We have property taxes of about $1.144 million. Again, this has typically been revised as new information has come about from the county. So the mid-year, actually in February, we expect to have what we call a mid-year budget review and adjustments for all of the district's funds at the board of directors February meeting, and you'll see probably some adjustments recommended to some of these line items because we have better information. That measure A for the current year is expected to be about $540,000. And then down below, as I mentioned, you know, so you saw like 4 line items in the audit report,
Yeah.
but we have like, you know,
Yeah.
40.
Mhm.
So we budget salaries. These are for full-time employees. Again, this budget would have included those SAFER grant positions only through the SAFER period. So the budget does not fund those full-time engineers beyond the SAFER grant period presently. So if there is a change, that'll be reflected in a budget adjustment. Over time, this would not have accounted for any sort of out-of-county assignments or anything that's atypical. This is an area that I know there'll be adjustments because we participated in 2 kind of long-term out-of-county, what we call out-of-county assignments. They're, you know, forest fire type assignments for essentially the whole month of August. So our overtime expenses have been a lot higher than this, but they're reimbursed through the Office of Emergency Services. I mentioned earlier the Reserve Firefighter Program. That was budgeted this year at $175,000. One of the items you asked previously, what might happen to those full-time positions? One of the concepts would be to utilize the reserve firefighter program to fund the ongoing costs of the additional engineer positions. And so this isn't this fiscal year we will be spending about $175,000 on reserve firefighters. And then these are all benefit line items. Those are all lumped together in that audit report. But you can see here that we have, unemployment, insurance, and workers' comp, and retirement, and what's called PERS retirement. That's the pension costs, health insurance. We fund a health reimbursement account. That's another benefit. And then we get into sort of professional services. And then this is a cost for dispatching. That's a service agreement we have with County Fire or through CAL FIRE.
What are professional services? What would that include?
I'm trying to think. It could be. Goodness. It's not. Because legal's already on here. It could be like some type of consultant or, they're usually consultants, with, like doing building or,
Is this soft, like,
it's not the software.
not the fire record keeping software? Image trend?
It could be. I think that's under purchase services.
Way less than that.
Yeah, that would be under purchase services.
We can, if we want to stop the meeting, we can
I can go
actually
look real quick.
pull the
Well,
agenda.
drive that one.
It'll only take a second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just give me a second. I'll check
Sorry.
it.
Yeah, no problem. But we can try to keep going and
Yeah.
then she can come back. So this $82,000 is our estimated cost for CAL FIRE for dispatch services. And again, I just want to highlight maybe some of the larger ones. We have purchased services and then supplies, like supplies for the station, supplies for supplies that are on the engine, et cetera. Uniforms, repair and maintenance, these items in the station that may need repairing. We tended to burn through that with like HVAC issues. Vehicle O&M or operations and maintenance, so this is fuel and repairs for the apparatus. Again, just for the fire fund. Phone services, electricity, again, for the station. Water and sewer for the station, gas utilities, there's some travel, like to educational, programs. Physicals for new employees, education, so training and education items. Dues, some subscriptions. I think this may be, the fee, maybe the countywide hazmat, those kinds of items. We participate in some joint efforts with the other departments in the county to jointly fund certain responses, hazmat being one of them. And now with this back, and maybe she can answer the question. That was 5,000.
So it's the consultants for the Measure A parcel tax.
Oh, there you
Oh, okay. Thank you.
go. And then, we do break out, on this, it happens to be a second sheet in this case, but any one-time expenses that are not ongoing or routine are separately listed for this fiscal year. Those were pretty minor. There was a shut-off nozzle that was, requested and funded. In some of the prior years, there'd be a larger number of one-time items. It sort of just depends on the circumstances facing the department on a year-by-year basis. So like last year, the year under audit, the one you just looked at, you can see these were the items that were these one-time items. There was chainsaws and storage cabinet and hose, and then some PPE And actually, I think we already, we just approved a budget, it's not yet reflected here, but the board approved a budget amendment at the last meeting to fund some additional, wildland, PPE that was partially grant funded. And then I mentioned that we had spent about $1 million last year on an engine. There's that cost right there. $1,004,000 was the payment of the engine. And then we had incurred some design costs for where we have a planned station expansion, and we have incurred some costs. We were projected to incur about $133,000 last year in the design costs for that expansion. So that's a review of the current year's initial budget, and every time you meet, we'll update you on that. Again, I expect that some of the figures we'll go through some amendments, because when we prepare the budget, we don't include the expected costs or costs for, like, say, again, what we call out of county assignments, because they're kind of random in nature. We don't know how long they'll be or how many there will be or if we can participate. And so they can fluctuate pretty drastically. And so we kind of correct those after the fact. There are reimbursements with them, so the revenue offsets the expenditures, but to get them trued up in the budget, there are amendments that don't need to be considered. So that's this sheet comes right out of our published budget. It just happens to be the sheets for the fire fund. So that's all that we had intended on reviewing as it relates to this item.
All right, well, thank you, Jeff, appreciate that. Okay, at this stage, we have covered all the major items on the agenda. Before I close the meeting, is there anything else that anybody needs to share or add questions that need to be asked at this point?
Going on in the report, there were a bunch of us consent agenda items. Is that something that we need to concern ourselves with, or?
Consent items like at a board meeting?
Oh, I think it was the backup to the budget. He was just showing the
Yeah,
expenditures to the budget line items.
If you go under, I was just curious, is that?
Oh, these were just items that were considered since that first budget was already approved. So for example.
They're already included in the budget?
Well, they've been added to they were amendments that were already added so far
But
since
not
the
on
budget.
that first sheet.
But they're not reflected there because
Oh, okay,
they're approved kind of one at a time.
okay, and then.
And there'll be more.
When it's revised, then all those will be.
So what ends up happening is when we, and I didn't include this, but when we publish a budget to actual, I'll call it a budget to actual report, it will include amendments that were approved that altered the budget, and you can kind of follow that. It's a printout out of the general ledger. It doesn't quite look the same format as that document that you saw. What this document is.
Okay,
It's a printout of our general ledger. We don't update this document during the course of the year, but we update the general ledger.
okay,
So
Like
these,
you could go to a
these-
treasurer's report and look at the fire section or the budget report in the treasurer's report. You go to that to Fund 21 and it would be up to date.
oh, okay, and it would include all the consent, okay.
or yeah,
And
they don't have to necessarily be consent items. They could be some of the budget amendment items are not on consent. They're on the regular business agenda. But if they're approved by the board, they have the same impact whether they're approved on consent or business agenda.
And all those items have already been approved by the board.
These, the ones that were attached here already were, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, so I think about this, we're about ready to conclude. I want to once again thank the staff for their role.
Yes, thank you.
You know, one of the things I've always been impressed about since I've been doing this is how creative the team has been in terms of trying to fit pieces together and make it really kind of stretch the impact of the dollars that we have, and they're limited. And I think that speaks for the culture of the organization and certainly for the fire emergency services. You know, what is it to make this work? So I appreciate that just as a citizen.
Thank you.
I will go ahead as promised and deliver a draft of the draft that we report to the board. Tomorrow, you'll have it. You can look at it over, forward it to the team, appreciate that. And if that's none of the other business at this point, we will be, if it all moves forward, we'll be looking at this on the board meeting, on January 20th for their approval. Sign off on it, and you're welcome to attend if you would choose to. So nice to kind of meet the members and them to know you.
Yeah, and again, so if that stays as expected, and there's not a need for this committee to meet prior to the preparation of that, finalizing that report, there may not be another Measure A committee meeting for some time. The committee is typically not met again until the fiscal year is closed. So like in September or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why I said probably by then we'll need to get another committee member. You're welcome to, if you have friends or neighbors who you think might be interested in serving, get us in touch, put them in touch with Carrie or let us know who they are and we'll get them the information out, because this committee would be better served if there were a few more people, and two, we will need one more, because the bylaws say that it's a committee of 3 at a minimum. So again, or the bylaws have to change. So we have about 6 months to kind of figure that out, but it's if you know somebody who might be interested in serving, then that'd be most appreciated. And then next summer we'll do like another recruitment effort if we don't have any other applicants or any other persons interested in being appointed, and then the committee would sort of take this process up again. So that's kind of how it's worked over the past cycles. It's not a very demanding role. Few meetings, two or three meetings a year.
Okay.
All right, on that note, I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 4 p.m. 1 hour after we got started, so we have like an hour credit.
Great.